Hey everybody, Nate Eaton here talking with Andrew Iden. If you're a true crime fan, I know many of you are, you're going to want to listen to this interview because Andrew and some colleagues have just released this week a brand new podcast that's pretty fascinating. Andrew joins me now on Zoom. Andrew, what is the name of the podcast?
Well, first of all, Nate, thanks for having me. The show is called Deviant, and the concept is, we are going to over the course of however many episodes it takes, we're gonna delve into people who do bad things and try to explore kind of the psychology behind it, the behavior, why people do the things they do. The first season that we're the first series that we're rolling out is a 7 episode series about Israel Keys. And then following that, we're going to delve into more stories, as we move forward. I think a lot of podcasts, what we're all used to is they come along for a season, right? 7, 8, 9 episodes, then they go away, and then they come back 6 months later. We're actually not going to do that. We've chosen the more difficult path, which is we're going to do as many episodes as it takes to tell that story, and then we're going to turn around and we're going to have a new story the next week. So we're starting with the story of Israel Keys as kind of our flagship jumping off point.
Okay, I will admit I had not heard of this story until, we started talking a few weeks ago.
Sure.
Inform the audience for those people watching that have not heard the name Israel Keys.
Sure. And honestly, that's one of the things that's so intriguing about it is this is a guy that not a lot of people have heard of. The story of Israel Keys is really one of a guy that hid in plain sight for years. He was arrested in 2012, February of 2012, for the murder and abduction of a girl named Samantha Koenig in Anchorage, Alaska. And upon his arrest, when he started talking to authorities about what he had done to her, which is just horrific, he actually started to spill the beans, as it were, and outlined for investigators that he was actually a guy who had been operating for years, committing crimes, committing heinous crimes, murders, sexual assaults, various other things. And he did this in one of the most meticulous ways that I think law enforcement or the American public has ever seen. In fact, in 2009, he buried, living in Alaska, he flew to back east, he flew to Chicago, drove to Vermont, buried in Vermont a kill kit with weapons, guns, ropes, etc. Buried it in the woods, returned home to Alaska, and then in 2011, 2 years later, flew back, went to Vermont, dug up the kill kit, picked people at random, and the victims in that crime were a couple that were by the name of Bill and Lorraine Currier.
Hmm.
And he outlined for investigators the detail, the minutia, the meticulous nature of his planning. He was a guy that traveled extensively all over the United States. He'd been to Texas, Wyoming, Vermont, Maine, New York, Washington, Oregon, and done horrific things. And the thing is, when he went to jail, he killed himself before he could go to trial for the murder of Samantha Koenig.
Mm.
And prior to his suicide, what investigators found in his jail cell was a sketch that he had drawn in his own blood of 11 skulls. And what investigators believe is that those 11 skulls represent 11 victims of his criminal behavior.
Wow.
Now, during the hours of conversation he had with law enforcement, which we were able to get our hands on, he essentially copped to 4 of those. So the case as it stands now of Israel Keys is that there are 4 that they can identify and that there are 7 that are still unknown.
Mm. And he's
And
dead.
and he is now dead, right? And so what went with him when he died was the full scope of what he did. Now, the thing is, what you'll hear in the show in these hours of interrogation tapes that we got is he has a push and pull with law enforcement. It is a constant negotiation. He's a guy that thoroughly enjoys the tennis match that, investigators and perps play, right? I mean, we've all seen these videos where there's kind of like a give and take of, I'm going to give you a little bit, but I'm not going to give you the whole thing.
Right.
And Israel Key's whole thing inside that interrogation room was, I'm going to walk you right up to the edge, but I'm not going to tell you everything. I'm going
Mm.
to tell you some of the truth, but I'm not going to tell you all of the truth. And so essentially, the end of the game was him leaving behind this sketch of 11 skulls. And so investigators are desperately trying to figure out what the rest of his criminal portfolio is. And frankly, when you look at his travel, which we were able to look at through some of these FBI documents that we got to look at, his travel is extensive. I mean, he's all over the place. And there's also crimes that occurred in those areas that are very possibly crimes that were Israel Keys' responsibility. But unfortunately, whether we're going to get full understanding of that, it's still up in the air.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So this, you said that were doing 7 or 8 episodes on this particular case?
Yeah, so this is the first story of Under the Deviant Banner. So the
Right.
Deviant show will explore other stories, but the Israel Keys case, me and Dan and Clark, the other two folks behind this show, we looked at a number of different stories. I mean, Nate, we've all been in this true crime. There's unfortunately there's hundreds of stories that you can kind of really dig into. This one just seemed like the obvious place to start because what you're hearing from him is a guy that is describing behavior that no one can comprehend, and he's doing it with an absolute callous and, you know, chilling disregard for anything.
Mm.
And coupled with that is this game that he's playing with investigators the entire time.
Right. Right. And still the unopened question as to where are these other people, these other victims, assuming there were more based on those skulls.
Right, right. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like we've got four that that folks, in charge of these cases have pretty much assigned to him. And then the other question is this a guy that was even telling the truth? He may have just picked 11, decided to do 11 skulls just to play a game at the very end, right? So the other thing to consider is that maybe he was just completely full of it. He might have been completely lying. So it's a baffling picture of a guy who, at the very end of his life, still wanted to play this game.
Right.
And whether we're going to get to the end of that game is tough to say, but we're doing our best to try to flesh all of that out.
And Drew, Cold Open Media, your company with your colleagues who you there mentioned, this isn't your first podcast. You had one that was very successful for those people that followed the Delphi murders.
Right. So I was one of the hosts of Down the Hill, the Delphi Murders. And one of the gentlemen behind Cold Open Media, our new company, was one of the producers on that show. So he and I, when we kind of found ourselves in a new phase of our careers, he is all audio. That's all he's ever done. I've done some audio. And then we had our third partner, Clark Goldband, who was really looking to jump into that space too. And the three of us got together, and it was complementary skill sets, right? Like I had done a little bit of both. I'd done a lot of TV, some audio. Clark had never done audio and mostly TV, and Dan had done all audio. So it was kind of like this perfect Venn diagram of like, I think our skill sets really work to overlap here. And so it just made sense that, a true crime show like this was where we started.
Right.
And I should say that the three of us, what we were very clear on from the jump was that, even though we are, an independent company, we wanted to use our journalistic skills as the jumping off point here. We're still using journalistic principles to apply to all of these shows, talking to the people that need to be spoken to, trying to get the comments and responses from the people that are involved. That's something that the three of us are pretty adamant that we're not going to waver on. So that's really one of our guiding principles when we go forward telling these stories.
Yeah, that's for those watching. There's a gazillion true crime podcasts that you can listen to, but many don't adhere to the journalistic standards and ethics and values that Drew just mentioned. That they'll just say whatever. So what I understand you saying, Drew, is that you're fact checking, you're interviewing all parties involved, you're not jumping to conclusions,
Right.
you're not blaming people that shouldn't be blamed.
Certainly.
Whereas you can't really trust some of these other podcasts.
Right. And I think, I hope that comes through in the show. The three of us came from the CNN universe, which has an incredibly strict standard and, series of checks and balances. And we took that same infrastructure concept that we all were used to at CNN, and we apply that to the work that we're doing now. Right. So two sources. It's got to be on the record. We need the documents to say it in order for us to really dig deep on it. If somebody says something about someone, we're going to go to get the response from them. Like these are the things that I think really separate good quality storytelling. And that's really a principle that we're not necessarily going to sacrifice.
Awesome. All right, Andrew, where can people hear the podcast?
You can hear it wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, all the things, iHeart, Odyssey, wherever you get audio on demand, our show will be there. So it's called Deviant, and it is out today.
Okay. Thank you so much. Looking forward to listening to it. And for those of you watching, we'll put a link down below that you can click on and you can go listen to those. Interested to hear what other stories you come up with too in the upcoming seasons, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it's almost not necessarily seasons, more like series.
Right.
But yeah, we've got a whole spreadsheet full of them, and we're kind of the machine is always on, so we're always doing that. And next time we jump into something in Idaho, I will make sure you're one of the first people to call.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks, Drew.